In the hour before you wake, your body has already begun the morning without you. While the room is still dark and the mind is absent, core temperature starts to climb. Cortisol begins its rise. Blood pressure lifts. The pull of sleep loosens. None of this is caused by the alarm clock. None of it waits for a decision. Before the first thought appears, the body is already acting on a dawn it expects. It is a preparation set in motion from within, timed to the expected arrival of morning, and then, into this quiet internal readiness, comes the event the whole arrangement is built around. Light begins to gather at the horizon, and dawn delivers a signal that the body has been waiting for since long before it could think. The title's phrasing, that dawn carries an instruction written before language, sounds like poetry, and in one sense it is, but it points towards something unexpectedly literal, because the way morning light reaches into the body bypasses almost everything we associate with seeing, with thought, and with the conscious mind entirely. To understand this, it helps to begin with a discovery that genuinely surprised the scientists who made it, one that revealed a sense most people do not know they possess. For most of the history of vision research, it was assumed that the eye detected light using only two kinds of cells, the rods and the cones, the receptors responsible for everything we see. If those cells were destroyed, the reasoning went, the eye would be blind in every sense, unable to register light at all. Then researchers studying some blind individuals, people who had lost their rods and cones to disease and who could not consciously see anything, noticed something that should not have been possible. In some of them, the pupils still contracted in response to light. Their bodies could still track the difference between day and night. Their internal clocks still kept time with the outside world. These people could not see the light, but some part of them still knew it was there. What this eventually revealed was the existence of a third kind of light detector in the retina, distinct from the rods and cones, hidden among the cells that had always been thought of as mere wiring. A small subset of the retinal cells whose job was assumed to be simply relaying signals turned out to contain their own light-sensitive pigment, a molecule called melanopsin, which made them directly responsive to light on their own account. These cells are few, a tiny fraction of the total, and they are not built for images. They cannot resolve detail or color. What they measure is not an image but an atmosphere, how bright the world is, whether the body is inside day or night. They are most sensitive to blue, cyan light, a strong component of daylight, and the brightening morning sky. And crucially, these cells do not send their information to the parts of the brain responsible for conscious sight. They send it elsewhere, along an ancient and separate pathway, to the deep regulatory centers of the brain that govern the body's rhythms, its hormones, and its readiness, structures that operate entirely beneath awareness. This is the sense that the blind patients had retained, a way of registering light that has nothing to do with seeing, a channel that reports the presence of day directly to the machinery that runs the body. It is in the destination of this pathway that the phrase about an instruction written before language acquires its real meaning, because the signal does not primarily go to the image, forming parts of the brain. It travels to the hypothalamus, to a cluster of cells that serves as the body's master clock, and to other nearby centers that control the pupil and influence arousal and hormone release. These are among the oldest structures in the vertebrate brain, the regulatory core that we share with creatures far removed from us, the part of the nervous system that was managing the basic business of staying alive, and in step with the environment for hundreds of millions of years before anything resembling human thought, let alone human language, existed. The morning light that reaches this pathway is not interpreted, not reasoned about, not consciously perceived. It is received as a regulatory cue by a system that predates cognition, a system that was reading the rise and fall of daylight when our ancestors were small nocturnal mammals, and earlier still. In that sense, the instruction really was written before language, encoded in the architecture of the brain, long before the parts of us capable of describing it ever appeared. The light sensitivity itself runs deeper still, into a past that dwarfs even the age of these brain structures, because the ability to detect light and respond to it is one of the most ancient capacities life possesses. The pigment molecules that absorb light in our eyes belong to a family that is found throughout the living world, in creatures with no eyes and no brains, in organisms that diverged from our lineage in the most distant reaches of evolutionary time. The capacity to sense light and use it to organize behavior is older than the eye, older than the nervous system, as we would recognize it, woven into life at a level so fundamental that it appears again and again across wildly different forms. The dawn signal, then, is not arriving at some recent human invention. It is arriving at the latest version of one of the oldest sensory relationships. There is the relationship between living things and the daily return of the sun, and the human body's response to it is the inheritance of that immense history, refined and elaborated, but not invented by us. What the morning cue actually does, once received, is to coordinate the body's transition into the day, and the most striking single element of that transition is the sharp rise in cortisol that occurs in the minutes after waking. This morning surge, sometimes called the cortisol awakening response, is a distinct and reliable event, separate from the general daily rhythm of the hormone, and it appears to function as a kind of mobilization, a chemical preparation for the demands of being awake and active. Light in the morning interacts with this response and with the broader clock, reinforcing the timing and helping to anchor the entire day's physiology to the actual moment of dawn. Light is the most powerful signal the human clock receives, and morning light is especially important for anchoring the day. Light early in the day pulls the internal clock earlier, holding it in step with the sun, while the absence of that cue allows the clock to drift. What dawn provides is, at bottom, a correction about time, a daily timing mark that tells the body when now is delivered through a channel that cannot be argued with because it operates below the level where argument is possible. This is also where the consequences of modern life enter, and where the story has to be told carefully rather than dramatically. For nearly all of human history, the dawn signal was unavoidable. People woke into a world that brightened around them, and the light that reached their eyes in the morning was the genuine, intense light of the open sky, far brighter than anything indoors. That signal arrived whether or not anyone paid attention to it, strong and unambiguous, and the body's clock was corrected by it every single day. The modern morning is different in a way that is easy to overlook precisely because it feels normal. Modern life did not remove the clock. It blurred the contrast the clock depends on. Mornings too dim, evenings too bright, nights no longer fully night. A person who wakes in a dim bedroom, moves through an artificially lit home, and travels to work without spending meaningful time outdoors may receive, in the critical morning hours, only a faint version of the prompt the body evolved to expect. Indoor lighting, which seems perfectly bright to the conscious eye, is often a small fraction of the intensity of daylight, and the light-measuring cells in the retina, which respond to the total quantity of light, register that difference, even when conscious vision does not. The cue still arrives, but muffled, weaker than the system was built to receive, and the daily correction it provides is correspondingly diminished. The clearest demonstration that this signal matters comes from the deliberate use of morning light to treat certain conditions, which has become an accepted medical practice. People who suffer from a particular form of depression that deepens in the dark months of winter often improve with timed exposure to bright light in the morning, light strong enough to approximate the cue that the short, dim days of winter fail to provide. People whose internal clocks run persistently late, leaving them unable to fall asleep or wake at conventional times, can sometimes shift their rhythms earlier with carefully timed morning light. These interventions work because they are supplying, artificially, the very prompt that dawn once delivered for free, and their success is strong evidence for the underlying biology. Evidence that the morning light signal is not a minor influence, but a genuine lever on mood, alertness, and the timing of sleep. The body responds to the restored input much as it would have responded to a bright ancestral morning, which tells us that the machinery is intact and waiting, lacking only the light it was designed to receive. And yet this is precisely the point at which the romance has to be restrained, because the temptation is to leap from these real findings to a moralizing conclusion, to declare that everyone must rise with the sun, that the early morning is virtuous, and sleeping past dawn is a betrayal of our nature. The biology does not support that leap, and the honest version of the story has to resist it. Human beings differ genuinely and substantially in their natural timing, in what researchers call chronotype, the disposition toward being a morning person or an evening person. These differences are real, partly written into our genes, and they are not failures of discipline. A significant portion of the population is biologically inclined to wake and sleep later, and forcing such people into a rigid early schedule against their nature can do real harm, producing a chronic mismatch between their internal time and the demands of the world. The morning cue is powerful, but it is a signal, the body uses to set its own clock, not a command that every clock should be set identically. The system is built for alignment with the day, not for a single correct hour of waking imposed on everyone alike. There is a further complication that resists the simplest reading of the title, which is that dawn does not actually issue an instruction in any literal sense, however useful the metaphor. Light has no intention and carries no message. It is simply present, or absent, abundant, or scarce. What looks like a command is the result of an immensely long process in which organisms that happen to use the reliable daily return of light to organize their physiology tended to fare better than those that did not, until the responsiveness became built-in. Dawn is not speaking. Evolution has simply made the body fluent in its arrival. This distinction matters because it keeps the phenomenon grounded in biology rather than mysticism. The morning light is not a voice and not a command from outside. It is a regularity in the environment that life learned to exploit so thoroughly that the exploitation now feels like obedience, an ancient bet on the predictability of the sun that paid off so consistently it became part of what we are. When all of this is held together, the meaning of the dawn signal comes into a clearer and more modest focus. The body does prepare for morning before the mind awakes, raising its temperature and its hormones in anticipation. And dawn does deliver, through a hidden sense most people never knew they had, a signal that reaches the oldest regulatory centers of the brain and helps to set the timing of the entire day. This signal is real, powerful, and demonstrably consequential, strong enough that its deliberate restoration can lift certain depressions and reset misaligned clocks, and weak enough in the muffled conditions of modern indoor life that many people receive only a diminished version of it. But it is not a moral command, not a universal prescription, and not a voice from the sky. It is the latest expression of one of the most ancient relationships in all of biology, the relationship between living things and the daily light of the sun, operating in us through machinery older than thought and far older than language. There is something quietly humbling in recognizing that one of the most fundamental signals organizing our days reaches us through a channel we cannot feel and we're not aware of possessing. The conscious, language-using mind we take to be in charge is, in this matter, almost a bystander. The seeing brain is not the first part of us to receive the dawn. That work is done by a handful of light-sensitive cells reporting to an ancient core, in a transaction that completes itself before we are even awake to witness it. Dawn is not speaking. Evolution has simply made the body fluent in its arrival. We can muffle the signal. We can override it with glass, concrete, screens, alarms, and schedules. But the system waiting for morning has not forgotten how to listen. And on any morning that we step outside into the gathering light, we rejoin, without effort and without awareness, a conversation that life has been having with the sun since long before any of it could be put into words.